Tim Kaine launched a direct attack on President Trump and ICE. For a brief moment, the chamber fell silent. Kaine said that in the United States, a 5-year-old child was taken into custody along with his father. He asked a simple but devastating question: what kind of law allows this to happen? He warned that what is happening in America today is not only unprecedented in U.S. history, but something rarely seen in any democratic nation around the world. Senator Kaine stated plainly that America's immigration policy has moved in a dangerous direction. He said that if a policy begins with the belief that immigrants themselves are a problem, then that policy is not merely flawed. It is morally bankrupt, legally bankrupt, and economically bankrupt. Kaine made clear that the damage is not limited to paperwork or policy debates. It is happening on the ground. Families are being detained, children are being swept into enforcement actions, and people with no criminal connection are being taken into custody. This was not a debate about opening or closing borders. It was a question of accountability, a question of the rule of law, and a question of power being exercised without restraint in the name of security. Now you will hear Senator Kaine's remarks for yourself, and why he warned that these policies are not making America safer, but are actively harming the nation right now.
Last month, federal agents detained this youngster, 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos, and his father from their driveway in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Is this a criminal? Is this a public safety threat to the United States? How could you make that argument with a straight face or accept it from a president with the kind of motivation that he has demonstrated in his hostility to immigrants? Liam had just gotten home from preschool with his Spider-Man backpack and his bunny stocking cap. He and his father were held in a facility in Texas more than 1,000 miles away from their home for over a week until a federal judge ordered that they be released. Dangerous criminal, keeping our streets safe. Over a 2-month period last year, according to the right-leaning Cato Institute, nearly 3/4 of people rounded up by ICE had no criminal conviction. None whatsoever. Of those who did have a criminal conviction, the biggest category was, drum roll, traffic violations. In February 2025, 3,165 immigrants with no criminal charges or convictions were detained by ICE. 3,000 in February 2025. Last month, January 2026, the number of people detained by ICE with no criminal conviction and no criminal charges had grown to 25,193. From September 21, 2025 until last month, January 7, single-day ICE detentions increased to 11,296 a day. But again, the stats showed that well over 2/3 had no criminal convictions and no criminal charges. How about U.S. citizens? As of October 2025, more than 170 U.S. citizens were detained by immigration agents. That's what we know of. 24 were held for more than a day without being able to call their loved ones or a lawyer. Nearly 20 of those U.S. citizens detained were children, and 2 of them had cancer. More than 50 American assistants were detained by ICE on suspicion of being undocumented. And guess what? All 50 were Latino, people whose skin color or ethnic background have been demonstrated by the president to be those he disapproves. Late last month, ICE agents went to a U.S. citizen's house with no warrant, broke his door down, dragged him from his home at gunpoint in his underwear in below freezing temperatures in front of his 4-year-old grandson. Neighbors took it all on video. The ICE agents drove him to the middle of nowhere and made him stand in the cold while they photographed him undressed. Then they finally drove him back to his home and dropped him off there with his broken down front door. This is not about law enforcement. This is not about public safety. It is a campaign against people because of the color of the skin or where they are from. If you support President Trump's policies, you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, it's not really about law enforcement. It's about 5-year-old kids. It's about U.S. citizens, about people who have no criminal background. And you ought to ask yourself whether that's, in fact, what you support. Immigrants are crucial and beneficial to the economy in Virginia and throughout America. Just some statistics. Nationwide, our immigrant families generated more than $236 billion in income in 2022 and paid nearly $66 billion in local, state, and federal taxes. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that immigration flows to the U.S. that are projected currently will likely increase American gross domestic product by nearly $9 trillion between now and 2034 if we don't screw it up. As of June 2025, 15.4% of U.S. residents are immigrants, including naturalized U.S. citizens. So everyone in this room has in their state hardworking immigrant families who do not appreciate being demonized by the president and his policies. Mr. President, immigrants make up 13.2% of Virginian population. That's more than 1 in 8. When I was born, it was 1 of 100. I was born in 1958. 1 of 100 Virginians in 1958 had been born in another country, and today it's 1 of 8. And so I guess that must mean, if you follow the president's logic, that this has been a horrible thing for Virginia. To the contrary. Virginia, by my last checking, was one of only 2 states in the United States that in my lifetime has gone from bottom quarter per capita income to top quarter per capita income. There is nothing about life in Virginia today that is not dramatically better than in 1958. And the growth of our immigrant populations, with their strength and their innovation and their culture, has been a huge part of the reason that Virginia has gone from back of the pack economically to front of the pack economically. Virginia has started to see some population decline in recent years, except for immigration. Immigration has actually enabled our state to continue to grow. Growth is helpful to the economy. Immigrants contribute $104 billion annually to the Virginia economy. Get this, 29%, nearly 1/3 of our Main Street business owners in Virginia are immigrants.
What was said on the Senate floor today cannot be dismissed as rhetoric or political theater. Senator Tim Kaine did not deliver a speech designed to provoke applause or score partisan points. He laid out a detailed case built on facts, documented incidents, and measurable consequences, all pointing to a deeper problem in how immigration enforcement is currently being carried out in the United States. Kaine argued that America's immigration policy is no longer operating within a balanced framework of public safety, rule of law, and human rights. According to him, the system has shifted toward fear-driven enforcement, selective targeting, and a growing absence of accountability. His warning was not abstract. It was grounded in what is already happening across the country. He began by challenging one of the central claims repeatedly made in defense of aggressive immigration enforcement. The claim is that these actions are focused on dangerous criminals and are necessary to keep communities safe. Kaine said that if this were true, the reality on the ground would look very different. Instead, the data and first-hand accounts show that a large number of people swept into enforcement actions have no criminal convictions at all. Kaine pointed to a case that has become emblematic of this problem. A 5-year-old child was taken into custody along with his father. The child had just returned home from preschool. There was no allegation that the child posed any risk. There was no claim of violent criminal activity. Yet the child and his father were transferred more than 1,000 miles away to a detention facility, separated from their community and legal support until a federal judge ordered their release. Kaine asked a direct question. What kind of legal system allows a child to be treated this way in the name of enforcement? He said this was not a reflection of strength or order. It was evidence of a system that had lost its sense of proportion and restraint. From there, Kaine moved to the broader pattern. He cited data showing that over recent months, a majority of people detained by immigration authorities had no criminal convictions. In many cases, they had no criminal charges at all. Some were detained for minor civil violations or traffic-related issues. Others were simply caught up in broad enforcement sweeps that made little distinction between individuals. He emphasized that enforcement actions are increasingly affecting people who are deeply embedded in American communities. Parents, workers, caregivers, and students are being taken into custody with little notice and limited access to legal counsel. Families are being separated, children are being left without caretakers. The impact of these actions extends far beyond the individuals detained. Kaine also addressed the detention of U.S. citizens. He cited documented cases in which American citizens were mistakenly detained by immigration agents. Some were held for extended periods without access to a lawyer or the ability to contact family members. Several of those detained were children. In at least 2 cases, the individuals detained were undergoing cancer treatment. He pointed out a troubling pattern in these incidents. Nearly all of the U.S. citizens mistakenly detained were Latino. This raised serious questions about whether enforcement decisions are being driven by appearance, language, or ethnicity, rather than verified legal status. Kaine made clear that this was not a debate about whether the United States should enforce its immigration laws. He stated plainly that every nation has the right and responsibility to maintain an orderly immigration system. The issue, he argued, is how those laws are enforced and whether enforcement remains consistent with constitutional protections and basic standards of fairness. He described incidents in which immigration agents conducted operations without warrants, entered homes, and used force in ways that would be unacceptable in other law enforcement contexts. In one case, agents broke down a door, removed a man from his home at gunpoint in freezing temperatures, and photographed him while partially undressed before releasing him without charges. Kaine argued that actions like these undermine public trust in law enforcement as a whole. According to Kaine, when enforcement agencies operate without transparency and accountability, they erode the very rule of law they claim to uphold. Communities become fearful. Witnesses are less likely to cooperate with police. Victims of crime become hesitant to report abuse. The result is not greater safety, but increased instability. Kaine then turned to the economic consequences of these policies. He rejected the idea that immigrants are a burden on the American economy. He cited data showing that immigrant households contribute hundreds of billions of dollars in income and pay tens of billions in local, state, and federal taxes each year. He explained that immigrants play a critical role in industries that are essential to the functioning of the economy. Agriculture, construction, healthcare, childcare, and technology all rely heavily on immigrant labor. In many rural areas, hospitals and clinics remain open only because they are staffed by immigrant-trained doctors and nurses. Kaine warned that when immigration enforcement creates an atmosphere of fear, the economic damage is immediate. Workers stop showing up, businesses struggle to operate, supply chains are disrupted. Entire local economies begin to feel the impact. He argued that policies that drive workers into hiding do not strengthen the economy, they weaken it. He also emphasized the long-term demographic implications. Immigration has been a key driver of population growth in many states. As birth rates decline, immigrant communities help sustain the workforce and support public programs. Policies that reduce immigration without addressing labor shortages create structural economic problems that cannot be solved quickly. Kaine placed these issues within a broader historical context. He reminded the Senate that immigration has always been central to America's development. Each generation of newcomers has contributed labor, innovation, and global connections. Turning away from that legacy, he argued, represents a fundamental break from the values that helped build the country. As he moved toward his conclusion, Kaine used his strongest language. He said that any policy built on the assumption that immigrants themselves are a threat is fundamentally flawed. Such a policy, he said, is morally bankrupt because it treats people as problems rather than human beings. It is legally bankrupt because it disregards due process and constitutional protections. And it is economically bankrupt because it targets the very people who contribute to growth and stability. Kaine stressed that these are not hypothetical concerns. The damage is already visible. Communities are being destabilized. Trust in institutions is eroding. Economic activity is being disrupted. He warned that if these trends continue unchecked, the consequences will deepen over time. He closed by making clear that his argument was not about partisan politics. It was about accountability, proportionality, and adherence to the rule of law. Immigration reform, he said, is necessary. But reform must be grounded in facts, fairness, and respect for human dignity. Kaine's message was direct. Policies that rely on fear and indiscriminate enforcement do not make America safer. They weaken the country internally while damaging its moral standing. The question he left before the Senate was not whether immigration should be addressed, but whether it would be addressed in a way that strengthens the nation rather than undermines it.